right, all right. Powerful, powerful. Peace and blessings to you, Edward Dodge. How you doing, sir?
Hey there, sa.neter. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, nice and clear, man. Nice.
Hold on. I got too much stuff.
Can you hear me?
All right. Hey, that's better. Sorry, I had double things going there.
All right, man. I love this topic right here.
All right, great.
I love this topic. This is a good controversial topic. So first, let me ask you, how did you come up with this topic? What qualifies you to talk about a topic like this? Let's start right there.
Well, I'm an independent researcher, so I have, come up with this stuff on my own, and I'm, willing to put it up for debate here. But basically on this stuff, I'm really following the academic consensus that is all pretty, the academics these days are pretty consistent that the first temple was polytheistic. And so I'm definitely operating from that position, and I've got my own nuance to it, but I'm for the most part going with academic consensus.
Okay, I think it's going to take you maybe a couple of shows for you to get into your bag, because you do know that this is the toughest environment to be in, right, sir?
Oh, I know it. I don't have anything prepared for tonight, but I am prepared to get prepared.
Right. Well, we got people out there like our captain Patriarchy, who is a Hebrew Israelite. We got our brother out there, Zion Lex and Elder Yahweh, and they defends the Bible at all costs. And for some strange reason, some of them follow the book literal. They believe that the book is literal, and they follow everything in it for some strange reason. But hey, I'm gonna step back and just let you go ahead and open up. Believe me, they watching, they waiting on the perfect time to jump in when they might disagree, but it's gonna be respectful, of course. That's what we push, that's what we advocate over here. And let's get it in. I'm gonna pass you the mic and let you begin.
All right, well, thanks.
You talked about when the Israelites was pagans, and you're gonna prove that there are two gods of the Bible. Let's get it in.
Great. Thank you, sa.neter. It's great to be here. Great to be here with you and with your audience. And I appreciate the opportunity to, present my case. As I was saying, I'm kind of riffing tonight because we didn't prepare a whole presentation, but I have written one book. This is the book I wrote originally, where I was kind of learning all this stuff as I go with History of the Goddess. So I'm proud of this book, but at the same time, I know it needs a follow-up that's going to be more argued more strongly, and so that's what I'm working on now, and I hope to share that information on this channel as I work through it in the coming months. But basically, the starting point here is my starting point in all this was diving into the story of Asherah, who is a character in the Old Testament that is the scholars say she was the wife of God, and so that when I first learned that just totally blew my mind a couple of years ago, because I was raised in church and I never heard anything about God having a wife, and it didn't really make any sense to me at all. And so as I started digging into the story, I was very surprised, by that, but I was also surprised that a lot of the academics don't really seem to make a big deal about God having a wife. Like, they don't dive into the theology of all that. So I wanted to learn about the theology, but we're just going to stick to just the basic facts here on the history. So what I've done in my previous book and in my new book is I've taken the historical timeline of all the archaeological evidence that we've got and put it on one timeline. Then you take this timeline of all the stories and of all the mythology and the Bible stories, so Mesopotamian mythology, Greek mythology, take all the stories and put them on timeline too, both in terms of when they were written and when the stories take place. You got to account for both of that. And then just sort of try and see how it all adds up and see where the story comes in. And so, as far as the two gods of the Bible, we have two names of God in the Bible. There's El, or Elohim, and there's Yahweh. And this is why they're translated as God and the Lord in the Bible. Scholars are totally 100% on this, that they were originally two separate gods. That the God El is a very widespread high father across all of Mesopotamia. He has various names and various cultures. They call him Anu in Mesopotamia. They call him An for the Sumerians. Same God. He's the high God above. He's the father of all the gods. And Asherah, the mother goddess, is his spouse, is his mate, and between them, they're the parents of the 70 high gods. And this motif repeats. It's in Deuteronomy. They talk about The 70 sons of El. I don't have that quote in front of me.
I'm sorry, man. I was looking at the chat, and did I hear you say that something like God had a wife, or are you saying that God had a wife or something like that? The God of the Israelites?
Absolutely. The God of the Asherah, the character in the Old Testament who's mentioned 40 times, always she's bad. You know, she is she's a Canaanite goddess, and they're trying to get rid of her all the time. With the modern scholarship, the total academic consensus is that she was they found archaeology where it's Yahweh and his Asherah, where they're being paired together as spouses, but also separately, she's very much Asherah is very much the wife of El. Like that's not even in a dispute in all the Canaanite mythology. In the Canaanite pantheon, you leave the Bible out of it, just the Canaanite pantheon that we know now from the Ugaritic texts, we know that El and Asherah go together as the heavenly father and the earthly mother, that they are the high gods and the parents of all the gods. Now, the biblical writers tell us that Asherah was a foreign goddess and that it's backsliding into worshiping Asherah. What I'm saying is that they say that for Baal also. What I'm saying is that Baal was the incumbent king of the gods, and Yahweh stages a coup against this old religion. The whole thing is a big reformation and a big revolution going on in the first temple that plays out over like 400 or 500 years. And so it's a revolution led by the Yahwehs. And Yahweh was just initially just another god. He's another god in the pantheon. He's one of the many sons of El. And we have references to this in the text. And so Baal was the existing king of the gods. Now, the biblical writers tell us Baal was a foreign god. But what I'm saying is that Baal was, the Israelites are Canaanites. They're, one subset of Canaanites. And so Baal was their existing king of the gods. You see this in Gideon and during the time of the judges, when Gideon is instructed by God to go and destroy the altars to Baal and Asherah that Gideon's father had made, and that all the people in the community are very mad at Gideon for tearing down these altars to Baal and Asherah. That's a very strong implication that, they were the domestic deities, like these were the deities of the tribe, and that this is something new that's happening to knock out the old gods. And so Yahweh is this insurgent coming with this reformation. And it's only much later that Yahweh and El get fused together and syncretized into the God of the Bible. But that comes that's really up for debate when they get merged together. Because traditional would say they've been merged together from the time of Moses, that Moses introduces Yahweh at the burning bush. They'd been worshiping El before that. But Moses introduces Yahweh at the burning bush. And by tradition, Yahweh and El are fused out of the gate from it's just a new name for El. What I'm saying is that that's revisionist history by the biblical writers. In reality, when Yahweh first came on the scene, he was one of the sons of El, and it's a polytheistic pantheon and a polytheistic community. And they have a revolution against the old gods. The Greeks are doing the same thing in their traditions. They are also having a revolution against this older generation of gods that they call the Titans, that I think are actually all the same gods as, in fact, it's totally explicit. In Greek mythology, they say El is Kronos. Kronos is the one that Zeus throws over, if you know Greek mythology. In the Greek mythology, they explicitly associate El with Kronos and Asherah with Rhea. These are the Titan gods that are the parents of Zeus, if you know your Greek mythology. Because I make that whole case in my book that these are parallel stories and a lot of a parallel cultural reform going on. I can keep talking if you have any questions. I can keep flowing.
Nah, keep it going. I'm just I'm listening, and I'm looking up stuff. Keep it going.
All right. Yeah. So to take it back to Abraham, I do believe that in the time of Abraham is second millennium. It's the Bronze Age. It's around 1800 BC, give or take, depending on where you want to place him. But it's sometime in the middle second millennium, Bronze Age, and he kicks off the worship of El, and then Jacob gets the name Israel. Jacob is the one who's given the name Israel, right? This famous story in Genesis, and one of the first things that Jacob does after getting the name Israel is he goes to the town of Bethel, which is a famous town in the Bible, which means house of El, and he builds an altar. And on the altar, he writes the words. In English, it says God is the God of Israel. But in Hebrew, it says El Eloi Israel. El is the God of Israel. And you can read that in the Hebrew. El is the God of Israel. And like, that's Jacob saying it right there.
Yeah. Uh-oh. Go ahead.
So we can pull that Hebrew text up. I use BibleHub.com for all of my Hebrew translations, and it's a pretty awesome tool. And so my position is it all during this time period in the second millennium, when before they go into Egypt, or even when they go into Egypt, they're polytheistic. We don't have to use the word pagan if people don't like that term, but they're polytheistic. They're Canaanites. They have the same Canaanite pantheon. And so the whole time when they're in slavery in Egypt, they would be still polytheistic. And even during the time of Joshua, later on, after they're in Canaan, they talk about how we worship many gods back in Israel before Moses came in with Yahweh. So then they've had the Exodus, they escape. I actually think there is an Exodus historically. I think it's a legitimate slave escape, and they flee into the desert. And this is when Yahweh comes on the scene. And this is the Bronze Age collapse. So this is what happens historically is at around 1200 BC to 900 BC, give or take, roughly speaking, there's a complete meltdown of civilization. All the cultures around the Mediterranean plunge into a dark age. The Mycenaean Greeks are totally destroyed. The Hittites up in Turkey are totally wiped out. The Sea Peoples invade all these, starting from the Aegean. They attack all the cities down the coast of the Levant coast there. That's when the city of Troy and the Iliad is destroyed in Greek mythology. And it's in this chaos that the Sea Peoples attack Egypt. It's in this chaos that I think that the Exodus happens. And that then in turn they come into Canaan after this big war in 1177 BC. This is the second big war with the Sea Peoples. And that's when we know archaeologically that the Philistines, because the Sea Peoples are the Philistines. So the Sea Peoples settle and become the Philistines in the Gaza, what is today the Gaza Strip. The Aramite kingdom, the kingdom of Aram, the kingdom of Edom, the Edomites, they all get established at this time, because prior to this, Egypt had been ruling Canaan with an iron fist for 400 years. But it's only after this big war in 1177 that Egyptian control breaks up. That's when they come in with the conquest with Joshua. We don't really have any history of this because it's all an illiterate time period. One of the things that happens in the Bronze Age collapse is that writing disappears. So we've got like 300 years where it's totally illiterate. From around 1200 BC, again, roughly time periods here, 1200 to 900 BC, say, there's still some Egyptian hieroglyphics, but all the cuneiform writing that had been the normal way that they wrote letters from kingdom to kingdom and all the royalty, they all use cuneiform for thousands of years. That stops being used at the Bronze Age collapse. And so for 300 years, there's no writing at all. And then they invent new languages. The phonetic alphabet gets invented from Phoenicians, which the Hebrews and the Greeks both copy to create their languages. Those languages are brand new when they start being used in the 9th century. So in the 800s BC is when that language first starts. At least we find the archaeology in stone of that language. So there's this 300-year time period that we have no written records at all. That's the time period of the conquest and time period of the judges and the time period of when David and Solomon would have been around. We have no good records of it, so one way or the other. My suggestion is that they're still totally polytheistic this entire time, and that the real reforms happen after they establish kingship. And the real reforms happen in the Book of Kings. And this is where we get into the Book of Kings, which I think is, the scholars are saying it's not real history. I actually think it's very much real history. It's just that it's a propaganda version of history written by the winners. But that there's loads and loads of archaeology to support the existence of most of the people that are written in the Book of Kings. So not King Solomon, but most of the people that follow are documented. And certainly the kingdom of Israel is thoroughly documented. The kingdom of Judah is thoroughly documented. And so we can go through just the history of the Book of Kings, and the biblical writers are telling us that all the kings are bad. And when they mean bad, what do they mean? They mean polytheistic. I mean, they're not following Yahweh. They're not following the rules that the biblical writers want them to be following. Well, all of the northern kingdom, every single king in the northern kingdom is pagan. Every single one of them. There's not one single king in the northern kingdom the entire time that is 100% true to Yahweh. Even Jehu, who kills Jezebel and sacks the temple of Baal and installs Yahweh worship, he is still a polytheistic guy. The biblical writers are very critical of him because he left up the golden calves, the old golden calf. There was one in the town of Bethel and another one in the town of Dan. In the Book of Kings, it says this, that Jehu was pretty good, but he still left up these old golden calves. The golden calf, in my opinion, is goes with El. Like that's the old El worship. That is because like the bull worship is something that's very prominent all the way through Mesopotamian and Neolithic religion. The bull goes with the god, goes with the king of the gods. The bull of heaven goes with the king of the gods, or the father of the gods. And so that bull motif and that cattle motif is really, really common, and you see it in Egypt. So that's one of the things that they're trying to get rid of. So when Jehu leaves the golden calves up in the kingdom of Israel, and he's operating in the mid 800s BC, he kills Jezebel. Jezebel's a real person. Her husband, King Ahab, was a real person. His father, King Omri, was a real person. Documented in archaeology. Jezebel's father was a king in Tyre and Sidon. He's a real person. We've got loads of archaeology that document many, many important events in the Book of Kings. Not everything, but lots of it. And so we can take a lot of the information, at face value to a certain extent. I think that when they're describing all of these, if you know the stories of the Book of Kings, you've got all these fights with the prophets. During the time of Jezebel, you've got the battle on Mount Carmel, where Elijah is the prophet of Yahweh who challenges King Ahab and Jezebel and their prophets of Baal and Asherah to this contest. It's a very famous story in the Bible, the battle on Mount Carmel, where they have to they put a sacrificial bull on the altar, but they're supposed to get its light on fire without using any fire. And the Baal worshipers can't do it. And they try all day long, praying all day long, and they can't do it. And then Elijah comes and he throws water on it, apparently. And then the whole thing erupts in flames. I suggest that it might be a trick with naphtha, nonetheless. And one way or the other, there's this whole contest. I actually believe that these fights are going on for real, as real history. I think there really was a legitimate historical contest between the followers of Yahweh and the followers of Baal in the 9th century and the 8th century and the 7th century, that they're still fighting about this stuff all the way through, right up until the exile, right up until Jerusalem is destroyed. Because like in the southern kingdom of Judah, most of the kings, by the biblical writers' accounts, are all so bad. There's only 2 kings that are truly, there's a handful that are good to Yahweh, but only 2 that are really good, and that's Hezekiah and Josiah. And they're late in the game. Hezekiah comes after the northern kingdom of Israel has already been destroyed. So Hezekiah's reforms are in the late 700s, like 710 BC, like late in the game. And then Josiah's reforms, and they're not popular. So as soon as Hezekiah dies, they go back to being pagan again. King Manasseh, which is the king that replaces Hezekiah, has the longest rule in all of the history of any of the kings, and he was really successful. He's documented in Assyrian records. Judah was very prosperous. It was a time of peace, and he was totally pagan. And the biblical writers are totally critical of him. And then a couple short-lived kings, and then there's Josiah. And Josiah is the second big reformer who, again, shuts down the worship of Asherah. He's cutting down the Asherah poles. Asherah is represented by this totem pole. And he destroys one of the temples to Baal. I was on the show the other night where we were talking about the temple at Tel Arad that was deliberately buried. That's one of the temples that has archaeological evidence of Asherah and Yahweh being worshipped next to each other with a pair of standing stones. And that temple was deliberately buried and by hand, like carefully buried. So when the archaeologists dug it up, hadn't been destroyed. It had been carefully buried. So like we know that, again, more archaeological evidence of these reforms. Well, the reforms wouldn't have been happening if whole Reformation just to go from paganism to monotheism. And my whole argument is that the monotheism, they arrive at it late, relatively speaking, like in the exile. And that most of the time in the First Temple, that they're really having a culture war where they're fighting over much more. They're not really fighting over theology as much as cultural practices, the women's sex lives, the matriarchal families. They're fighting to institute patriarchy once and for all. They're fighting to get rid of women's independence. They have to get rid of these goddesses that are not submissive. This is why we have the story of Lilith, the legend of Lilith, that Adam had a first wife who was not submissive before Eve. Well, that's because we actually had religious traditions where the women and the goddesses were not submissive to the male gods. That's the whole thing with Asherah, Astarte, and Anat, is they're not submissive to the male gods. If you read the Canaanite mythology, if you read the Mesopotamian mythology, where Ishtar is the equivalent of Astarte, she is not submissive to the male gods at all. And that's why they get rid of her. They got to get rid of her. If you want to have a patriarchal society where the women are all submissive, you can't have these goddesses running around teaching the women to be not submissive. And so that's these reforms that are happening. And the Greeks also do something very similar. Questions?
Wow, man. This is a lot. I want you to finish off what you want to say before I even open up the floodgates, because I know a lot of people like to come in and probably ask you some questions.
Yeah, and I wish I had all the biblical references in front of me to be more meaningful, and we'll have that in the future. But yeah, I just want to
can you talk to us about the Canaanites as being Israel, because you still got people who gets it confused and they say the Canaanites are not Israelites. Those are different people.
And fair enough. I mean, the Bible teaches that the Israelites are different people from the Canaanites. So if you have your traditional belief, there's no reason to dispute it. And prior to all the archaeology, we had no reason to dispute it either. If you go back 200 years ago to 1820, the only thing people knew about the ancient world was the Bible. Unless you could read the Greeks and Romans, we literally had no other information at all 200 years ago. There was no reason to dispute that the world was 6,000 years old, even if common sense, you're like, I think it probably is older. You had no authoritative measure to say the world is older than 6,000 years ago in the year 1820, because there was no other science hadn't come along and all the archaeology hadn't come along. So these are all it's all very new information. And the Ugaritic texts are the ones that I found most fascinating. And that's the one where, again, they only dug them up relatively recently, and they've only been released to the public like not that long ago, like since the 1970s or something. Like, it's not that long ago considering Bible stuff. And these are Canaanite mythology that have all the characters, Baal, Asherah, Astarte, El, Anat, they're all in it, Yam and Mot, and we had never had that stuff before. And so now we can link it all to the Bible. Hello, Captain.
Tazaria.
Name right, Captain Tazat.
Captain Tazaria. You can say T if that makes it better.
Captain T. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. I had a question. I noticed you said I think your position is that Yahweh. I'm using the word you're using. I would say a different word, but Yahweh and El are two separate. You look at them as two separate deities, and then they come together.
We eventually get merged together.
Got you. So now you don't look at El just like the word Elohim or El as just a name or title of a god, whether it be a pharaoh. Like, and I'm coming from like the biblical text, like whether it be a pharaoh who's in charge, we call the god, or an individual, like when Psalms 82, when it says you're God. Because when you look up the etymology of the word, it just means power, authority, judge, ruler, etc.
Right.
So when it comes to Yahweh or Yahweh, as you say, when he says like he's God or the most high God, would he just be making a statement that he's the highest God and there isn't a God higher than him? Would it be more like that? Or do you really look at them as two separate?
I think that there's a pattern of father and son as like co-regents. They're both the king of the gods, so to speak, and you see this pattern across the Near East. Mm-hmm. And so in Babylon, Marduk was the king of the gods, and they called El, their name for El was Anu in the Babylonian time period. So they're both kind of king, but like Anu, like the high god, is distant and far away. He's not really messing around with the humans. It's his son who's the local king of the gods. And then you go up the road from Babylon, and in Nineveh, which was the Assyrian capital, Asherah was the king of the gods over there. And I think for Canaanites, it was Baal was the king of the gods, and they called him Lord. And then Yahweh had to defeat Baal and take all of his titles. He took his title Lord. He took the title Rider on the Clouds and a bunch of other titles. Meanwhile, El had always has final authority. I mean, he's like still the father. No one's touching him.
Right.
But like if you're a Phoenician, let's say you're you live in Tyre and you worship El and Baal, and the guys down the road are worshiping Yahweh. Even if those guys in their mind have syncretized Yahweh and El in their tradition at a very early, let's say for the sake of argument, at a very early date, one community does. El is still being worshipped in his traditional way down the road by a different set of folks, and so you have to deal with. They're both happening at the same time.
Okay, so when you think about the commandments, the first commandment is thou shalt have no other gods above the Most High. And then if you take Psalms 83 and the last verse, when it says thou whose name alone is Yahweh, who art the Most High over all the earth, wouldn't that conflict? Because from your understanding, it would be two gods joined together, but based on the law, the first commandment, it could only be one God. And then in Psalms 83, it says, thou whose name alone is Yahweh, art the Most High over all the earth. So how would you reconcile that concept?
Well, it's a good question. I do think that I do think that those Moses stories are written later, and so that I think there's an older historical Moses, and then he gets like recapitulated maybe multiple times, and so I think that the folks who wrote those laws, the Ten Commandments you're talking about, have already done the syncretization. Like in those guys, it is one God by the time they write that text you're referring to. But there are some texts that are older than that where you can see that they're separate. So these texts are written hundreds and hundreds of years apart, depending on which text you're talking about.
Right.
And so you've got some that are old where you see these vestiges of the separation, but most of the Bible is written after they've been joined together. So like,
so what would you say about the Psalms 83 when it says thou whose name alone are Yahweh, art the Most High over all the earth?
Pull that one up. There's a couple Psalms that are some of the evidence I use.
The one I'm referencing this is Psalms 83 and 18. The word there is not necessarily El, it's El. When I looked it up, it's Elyon. But I believe that Elyon goes in conjunction with
El Elyon is part of it. That's one of the titles. El Shaddai, El Elyon.
Right, exactly. And that's kind of how I look at El or Elohim as a title, because anybody can be a El or a power. Like if you just again look at the etymology of the word,
true.
Right. And so when I look at Psalms 83 and 18, when it says that men may know that thou whose name alone is Yahweh or Jehovah, it says in the text, art the Most High over all the earth. Now, this is a text that is definitely after Moses' time, but it's also reiterating that he's the Most High alone. Like there is no other power or entity with him. Because so my position is that whether we say Yahweh, Yahweh, or Jehovah, or if we say God or Most High God, we're still talking about the same person. It would just depend on the context. That's why I mentioned like Pharaoh, even the other gods that you mentioned, Marduk and stuff like that, they would be considered gods just based on the position. I think that's why we even have the term Most High God in reference to Yahweh, Yahweh, or Jehovah, because we're making sure that people know that he's above. I also like not to add how you mentioned the battle that Elijah had with the prophets of Baal. That battle was also to establish the Most High God as Yahweh. So that's kind of how
he's got to take the title from Baal. Like
right.
Baal had the title.
Let me ask you a question, Captain.
No problem.
Are there more than one God in the Bible with power? Or are you saying there's only one God in the Bible with power?
So here's the position that we take, and I'm going to use what the gentleman, I believe his name is Edward. I'm going to use what Edward brought up. When Edward brought up the battle of Baal between Elijah and the prophets of Baal, there was a battle of the gods because men said Baal is the God. Elijah said Yahweh or Yahweh is the God. So to say that there's no other gods mentioned in the Bible would be an incorrect statement. There are other gods mentioned in the Bible, but the children of Israel are only supposed to believe that the Most High or Yahweh or Yahweh is the only true God. All the other gods are supposed to be considered false idols. But like Edward mentioned, you see all throughout Israelite history, we're worshiping other gods, whether it's Asherah, Astarte, Ishtar, Baal, any god you name, we following after the other gods. So I can never say that there's no other gods mentioned in the Bible. But the Israelites' position is that there's only one true living God.
Think
Maybe that
about
helps.
it,
Yeah,
Captain.
so Captain T, I'm with you, Captain T. And
Okay.
I would just say, I would only add to that by saying the transition took a few centuries. Like it took a few hundred years to arrive at where the biblical writers wanted them to be. And my only like sort of where I'm like going to call an issue with the biblical writers is when the biblical writers say Baal and Asherah were foreign gods. I'm saying that they were the native gods. But other than that, I'm like,
When you say native, meaning like that they were gods of the Israelites before
Yahweh even came on the scene. Like Yahweh just wasn't even on the scene before the Exodus. Like there's no evidence of Yahweh before 1200 BC.
Look at it. Look at this.
Well, I take that back. I take that back. He wasn't like a high god before. Like
yeah, I would say so I would say I'm sorry, sir.
I wanted to say this real quick. Let's look at it like this. Whoever the authors is, we know that they favor the book in their story. So if you was the author of a book, you're going to make yourself stand up. Hey, all the other gods, all the other Israelites are not affiliated with the Israelites of YHWH. You know how you say. See? So there's many Israelite groups out there. But because you are the author of your story, you say, if you're not affiliated with YHWH, you're not in the truth.
But see, like,
hold on.
Okay.
I'm getting somewhere. So that's the same way when it comes to the Bible to me, because he who's the author of the Bible and they're writing the story. So of course they're going to say we the big gods. So they put the big G and all the other gods, these the little gods over here. It's the same equivalent that you say if you're not affiliated with IGBK, you're not
I know, right. You're not of the truth. So what I would add,
imagine if L and his crew would have wrote the Bible. They would have had the big L and the little L gods. You see what I'm saying? You get where I'm going?
I do, but what I would say though, what I love about the Bible outside of other texts is that for that to be a book for the children of Israel, it shows their shame and glory. It doesn't hide the shame. So you'll see their disobedience, it's more disobedience in the text than good in the text. Like even the way Ed was,
absolutely.
Yeah, like even when Ed was breaking down with the Northern Kingdom, they was habitually going off and not serving. And Israelites was constantly disobeying. So that's why in honesty, you can't say that there's no other gods mentioned in the Bible. The whole goal was to get Israel to follow after Yahweh, the Most High God, or the only true living God for the children of Israel. And then one more thing, because I see you got other people in here, so I don't want to take up too much time. But the only thing I want to add, when you bring up that Yahweh wasn't as known, Israel as a nation is the youngest nation in the Bible. Like if you was to look at the nations in their birth form, the last nations formed was Esau and Jacob. Esau became the Edomites, Jacob became the Israelites. So before you had anything written down, it was really oral tradition passed down from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob. Jacob names gets changed to Israel. That's why even in Exodus, when Moses meets Yahweh for the first time at the burning bush, he says, but by my name, Yahweh, was I not known. He was only known as the Almighty or the terrible God, because he was the God of the man of war. So I can't disagree when you say Yahweh wasn't known maybe by that name, but he was known as the Almighty, because you'll see the stories when Abraham goes into Egypt and he tells the Pharaoh, this is my sister. And then the Most High plagues him. And then he says, why you didn't tell me? So they knew of him, but he wasn't widely worshipped because he didn't have a statue. There was no female counterpart to him. So he wasn't the God that everybody wanted to worship. So I wouldn't say he was unknown, but he wasn't worshipped like the other gods were worshipped, is what I would say.
All right.
Hey, hey, so I'm a step up, but Edward, it was definitely good dialogue. Maybe it's something we could dialogue.
Look, I'm hope to be back here some more, so I hope to continue this dialogue with all y'all.
Yeah, definitely.
Right, Captain.
Oh, can I add one more?
Moon, if you want to come in, you got to come out the dog. We ain't playing hide and seek. We need to see who you are, brother. If you're scared, get a dog. You got to come out the dog. Turn on the light. Yes, go ahead, Edward.
Oh, I was going to say, you mentioned Psalm 83. Psalm 82 is one of the best details we have for, and I pulled it up here, for the polytheism. It says, this is Psalm 82:1. God presides in the divine assembly. He renders judgment among the gods. God presides in the divine assembly. He renders judgment among the gods. I think it is. And so this is one of the favorite. This is one of the favorite verses for folks that are looking for evidence of the polytheism, is when they're talking about El ruling in the divine assembly. Because to my mind, there's a lot of commentary about what is that divine assembly. People have a lot of different ideas. To me, it's just the Canaanite council of gods up on Mount Zaphon, just as the Greeks had their council of gods on Mount Olympus.
All right. Like the video. Thumb up the video.
Definitely was a good conversation, Si. If we was to ever have a one-on-one, I would definitely be interested in that. But I do see you got other.
We're gonna work on that. We're gonna work on that.
No problem. All right, man. Y'all take it easy. Edward, good talking to you.
Thank you, Captain T.
All right.
Okay. Neftali, do you have a question? Neftali?
I'm here. Can you hear me this time?
I hear you. Do you have a question?
I do. What is his name?
Edwards. We can't really hear you on your mic.
Hear that?
We can't hear your microphone, Neftali.
Sorry, how about now? Do I sound better?
You sound a little hollow. Can you what's the matter with your system?
I'm gonna leave.
Okay. All right. Let's get on over to Suntan. What's up, Suntan?
Hey, how you doing, Side, Paul, and brother Edward Dodd? Just one question for you, because you know this thing called religion is a big thing. What do you find that's advantageous to your life in this thing called religious? I would like to know that.
For me personally?
Yeah.
Well, to give a little bit back myself, I grew up in church, but I deconstructed from Christianity as a teenager, but I never became an atheist. So I've always been on the comparative religion and kind of mysticism path, and influenced by Hindus, influenced by Native Americans, influenced by a lot. And I firmly believe, we need sort of a thesis of my writing is that we are in this historical moment right now where we've transitioned from the Iron Age into the Space Age, and our old religions from the Iron Age are kind of breaking down, and we need to reformulate them for the Space Age. And I think it's really important. I think we need to take what's good and take what's works from these old traditions, and take the wisdom and mine these traditions for their wisdom and take them forward, because we need them. We need an ecological civilization, and atheism doesn't work, but so we got to, I think it's really important to explore these old traditions and figure out what works for the space age. That's how I see it.
All right, I need y'all to try to stay within the topic of the discussion. Y'all see what the topic is? Let's talk about the pagan gods. Let's talk about the pagans. Was Israel pagan? Prove that there were two gods of the Bible.
Yeah. Shalom, can you hear me now, sa.neter?
Yeah, we can hear you. I just want to say peace to you, Edward Dodge. I've been teaching this for a while. I'm so glad you come in and can have a dialogue with the audience and with the group. And yeah, that's all I want to just say for now. I'm going to go ahead and mute out. Go ahead, Neftali.
Neftali, you got the floor.
You're muted.
Neftali, calling on Neftali.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. My phone, I'm in the car. My phone's breaking up. All right. So, how you doing? Shalom, Most High, bless you, Edward. How are you doing today?
Hello, Queen. Nice to meet you.
Yeah. So I'm going to speak with you about Baal. All right. So you said Baal is, you said there's 2 deities in the Bible, and one of them is Baal. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, a lot of deities, but I think Baal was the king of the gods prior to Yahweh taking his throne.
All right. And you believe the Israelites to be the Canaanites?
I think they're a subset of Canaanites. Yeah, like, there's lots of different Americans out there, lots of different subgroups of Americans, and I think Israelites are one subgroup of Canaanites. Yes.
Okay. So there are different tribes of Canaan. Was it 11 sons of Canaan? So that's what you're resorting to, is the different tribes as ethnicity.
I'm not making that specific argument, but I mean, the 12 tribes of the Israelites are like, those are Canaanite tribes. Like the tribe of Asherah lines up is from the Lebanese coast, where it's Tyre and Sidon. So yeah, I think that they're, I think when you lay out the 12 tribes of Israel on the map, like they're all over Canaan. I think they're.
Are you familiar with the Book of Jubilees?
A little bit, not really.
Okay, so the Book of Jubilees actually speaks on how Canaan actually stole the land of the Israelites, stole the land of the children of Israel.
Okay.
So the thing is that the Canaanites have no claim to the children of Israel. They just came and overtook what was originally theirs. So this whole claim that they were Phoenician or they were Canaanite is not anything that is based off of anything biblical. As well as historically, when you guys are finding cemeteries and you're finding the Canaanite cemeteries, but are you finding any of the Israelite cemeteries to make such a claim?
The cemeteries. I mean, I'm definitely working with academic consensus, so they're not using biblical evidence. They're definitely using more archaeological evidence, and I think that's actually part of the problem with the discussion between the academics and the theological crowd, is there's too much of a gap between them. But I think that you can see some clear identifications of Israelites as a distinct people in this time period. Like, for instance, the eating of pork is something that shows up in the archaeological record. Like they're only eating pork in certain towns or not eating pork in others, either way. And so while you can't make a perfect, map that perfectly to different identities of different groups, you can see very clearly that these kinds of distinctions were already happening back then. So I do think that they had a distinct identity, and I think it's becomes a question of how do you define what's a Canaanite? I mean, I describe the Canaanites as just, to my mind, they're just the people that have been living there all along, because people have been inhabiting that land for many thousands of years.
Naphtali, let me ask you a question. You don't believe that the Canaanites are Israelites, right, Naphtali?
No, the Canaanites are not Israelites. According to scripture, the Canaanites are Ham. They're Hamites.
Nepal been trying to get that debate with you for a long time, and you never accepted that challenge. So will you accept that challenge that the Canaanites are Israelites? Will you accept a challenge like that?
Well, yeah, I had spoke to her about the Canaanites, as well as, the Amorites specifically. I was speaking with her about them, the Habiru. But me and her, we can definitely have a conversation more about that. But
we can talk about that's good. Okay.
Okay, but Edward, when it comes to, so when you come to Baal, we know that Baal goes to Enki, correct?
That Baal is associated with Enki.
Yes, so this is where all of it originates with Enki, and we go into the Sumerians.
Yeah, I think there's some connections there. I mean, I think there's a closer connection with Enlil, but I think that I think Enki kind of like that character of the Enki is like the primordial fresh waters. Like in the oldest traditions, he's kind of like this creator god, and his role kind of shifts over time. So yeah, I do think that you probably can. It's not one I've looked into closely, the specific Baal to Enki connection, but there probably is. I can accept that. I haven't looked at it closely though.
Can I say something? Do you mind?
Yes, go ahead, Nepal.
Right. I just want to point out that when you mentioned that in the scripture, it says that the Canaanites, that the Israelites had their land stolen from the Canaanites. You're going to, which is okay, you're going to extra biblical book, but the original book talks about Abraham actually being told by God, I'm going to give you these people's land. So in the actual biblical text, more than once, Abraham is eyeing the land of Canaan, and he's got in his communication with God, God's telling him, I'm going to take these people's land and give it to you. So that's scripture that it was actually their land. And then the Israelites took it. Or actually the people, the people of God took it. Abraham wasn't an actual Israelite, but, and then of course, Moses and everybody, they went over there out of Kemet. And so there's many parts of the Bible that show that the land was taken by the Israelites. However, I agree with Edward Dodge 100%. The Canaanites, the Israelites are Canaanites. They're, like he said, a subset. They are a group of Canaanite people. They definitely were Canaanites. And they worship Canaanite gods. They never stopped. Even when you mentioned that the scripture about, I'm talking to you, Edward, when you say that they tore down the idols, they still continue to worship Canaanite gods. And they also continue to do child sacrifice. Just want to throw that out there too. And that's biblical as well as extra biblical.
All right. Let me go to I'm gonna come back around to y'all. Sunshine, what it is, man? You have a question, a statement, what?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions for Brother Dodge.
Nice to meet you, Sunchild.
Peace, thank you, pleasure. The first question relating to the name El. I think I hear you saying that the name El is originally a proper noun or proper name, which eventually became a generic term for the idea of a deity, or any deity would be called El. Is that correct?
I didn't exactly make that argument. Elohim, the word Elohim is like generic for the same way we use God with a lowercase g or a capital G. The word Elohim can go both ways. As far as the actual etymology of just El by himself, that actually I don't know. So I'd be open to being educated on that. How old that word El is exactly, I don't precisely know, or how far back they find it. That's a good question. I don't know.
Okay, and as relates to the term God itself, it's my understanding that that term is also derived from the proper name Gadan, a derivative of the name for Odin, the Germanic deity. That is, when the Germanics translated the Bible, they used the names of their own deities in replacement of the others. Are you familiar? Do you know anything about Gadan as it relates to the term God?
Not specifically, but I do know that the Norse mythology it's a later version of the same Indo-European pantheon that we see through the ancient Near East. And so there's a ton of parallels. It's not something I've studied closely, but yeah, I accept what you're saying, and that there's a ton of parallels, but at the same time, the stories are like that we have anywhere like 1,000 years later or more. So a little bit they're different too. Okay,
and finally, I hear you say that you believe that the Exodus is an actual historic event. What evidence do you have of that?
All right, so I've got my own personal pet theory. I'm going to take my personal pet theory on this, which is that as I like to say, I like to put everything just on the historical timeline and see if how things shake out. And so I look at the Merneptah Stele. I think this audience is familiar with the Merneptah Stele. It's the oldest evidence of the name of Israel. It's a victory stele by the pharaoh Merneptah from Egypt in 1209 BC, and it's it says Israel is laid waste, their seed is no more. It's just one line. It describes Israel as a people, not as a place, and says we got rid of them. And most scholars don't take my interpretation. My interpretation is that that's Pharaoh's side of the Exodus. That's Pharaoh saying, like, we got rid of those pesky slaves. You heard about them escaping? I got rid of those guys. You'll never hear from them again. Meanwhile, the oldest text from the Bible, or one of them is the Song of the Sea, the Song of Miriam, which is the oldest passage that describes the Exodus. And that's also from a similar time period. It's from the 12th century BC. It's from the oral tradition. And it's and in that, it's not a very long passage, but it kind of describes a military encounter with the Egyptians. And it says, long story short, we barely escaped by the, divine intervention and the grace of Yahweh. We escaped the chariots and fled into the desert. To me, and again, this is my personal pet theory, but it lines up on the timeline. I think that's two sides of the same story. I think the Song of the Sea, the Song of Miriam, and the Meneptah Stele are telling two different sides of the same story. The Israelites are saying we barely escaped, and the Pharaoh saying we got rid of those guys, you'll never hear from again. That's my personal pet theory.
Okay, did you say Song of the Sea, S-E-A?
S-E-A, yeah. It's also called the Song of Miriam. Miriam is Moses' sister. And it's in Judges. No, Exodus. I don't know where that passage is. I could find it.
That's okay. I'll look further into it myself. That's fine. But I appreciate the time. Thank you, Brother sa.neter.
Thank you, Sunchild.
Thank you.
All right. Let me come on over to my man Morpheus is in the building. Morpheus, what it is? What it do?
What's up? Peace to everybody. Peace. How you doing?
Hi, Mr.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
How you doing? All right. This is an interesting show. I want to ask you a question, and half the other part is actually a request from your queen, Sa, because I really want to go in depth on this at some point. What is your thought on Mr. Dodd first? Yeah, Mr. Dodd. What is your position or your thought process on the Elohists and the Yahwehs? Right? Because it seems to be two. I'm doing some reading, and it seems to be two different groups, right, within the biblical narrative, how they're divided between the Yahwehs and the Elohists. And I think that's something that's why I was asking Saul if your queen could do a show on that, because that's something that we really got to unpack. So what's up, Mr. Ed?
I'm happy to talk about it. It's a terrific question. It's a perfect question, really. Scholars, when they talk about who wrote the Bible, they do this thing they call the documentary hypothesis. I imagine, hopefully the audience is familiar with it, that they talk about JEDP as these four, not individual writers, but four groups of writers in different time periods. And so my pet theory on how that works, my sort of bastardized version of a documentary hypothesis, that J and E are the two older. They're like the stuff that's so J is all the writing about Yahweh that comes from Jerusalem and that comes from Judah, and it's only about Yahweh alone. And it's whatever's the oldest things that are oral tradition or early writing. Likewise, E, which is the smallest set of passages out of those four, are the oldest, like, oral tradition that would only mention El and not mention Yahweh at all. And there are stories that are in there that have no mention of Yahweh. They just talk about either El or Elohim. And so there's folks that have like teased this all apart. They're academics that have teased it apart verse by verse by verse and separated it all out. Then you get the D and P. And so E is coming out of Israel, presumably, at least for the sake of discussion. Those texts are coming out of Israel, and they're just about El. They don't talk about Yahweh. Then Israel gets destroyed, but the southern kingdom of Judah still exists for another 150 years or so. The refugees come down to the southern kingdom. That's when Hezekiah and Josiah start doing his reforms. And that's when you get to D. That's the Deuteronomist. And that's during the time period of Josiah. Jeremiah is a prophet. This time period, they're literate. They're clearly literate by this time period in the story. They're talking about writing. They talk about writing text. They talk about reading text. Because if you go back to the older passages, they don't have a Torah in the Judges. King David's not carrying around Torah. They don't carry King Solomon. They don't carry the Torah back into because in that time period, they weren't actually literate. That's why they're not talking about writing. But centuries later, they are literate, and they are in the stories. They're talking about them writing. And so in Deuteronomy, that's a set of writers that academics think they wrote the book of Deuteronomy, but they also wrote what they call the Deuteronomist history, which is all the stories from Judges, Ruth, Samuel, Kings, right? I think I'm getting that correct. That whole set of books, they think is one long narrative, basically written by this set of writers in late in the First Temple. And then obviously that gets destroyed, temple gets destroyed, whatever texts survive are transmitted to Babylon, and then you get the fourth group of writers, the P writers, who they write the book of Leviticus, but they also do the final stitch together the whole text into the form we see to get today. And that's presumably done by Ezra, the scribe. That's what tradition says. And then he brings the completed Torah back to the Second Temple at the beginning of the Second Temple in 458 BC. That's the traditional date. Scholars, argue about that, but that's the rabbinical. That's what the rabbis say is 458 BC. So JEDP, I do think there is a set of texts. It's a small set. It's a small set, but there are some passages that are about El alone. They're not about Yahweh, but they all get stitched together to make them into one God. It's actually a brilliant piece of literature. I mean, it's so amazing what the biblical writers did in terms of literature to take all these disparate stories and stitch them together back in that time period. It's really quite an amazing piece of work.
All right, Ross Sin. What's up, brother?
What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Can you hear me good?
Yeah, we hear you.
A little bit, yeah. Hello, nice to meet you, Rasid.
How you doing? Nice to meet you. Real quick, so I just want to make the distinction between the Bible narrative and actual historical records. And when you talk about Abraham, the ideology of what they believe in, I would think it would be moon worship, right? Because when you say Abraham, he's from Ur, and historically there's a moon cult there, and then he moves to Haran, which is the name of his son, and there's also a moon cult there. So once he starts to move on, he ends up in Egypt and everything like that. So with the basis, would you think the basis and the ideology of that would be, the moon, right?
Well, Paul, it's some Mesopotamian religion for sure. And I think you're making a good case there. But yeah, Abraham is clearly from Mesopotamia. The Bible tells us that. And he doesn't start his whole, all his stuff with God until late in his life. So what was he doing for all of his youth? He was living a conventional Mesopotamian life, presumably, right? He grew up in a Mesopotamian town and lived a Mesopotamian life. And so whatever would have been the religion out there is what he would have been doing. And I think you can make the case for the moon. It's not something I've looked into specifically, but I think that's a perfectly legitimate argument you're making.
Yeah, and when they talk about the name, him telling them his name Jehovah, and he says that he appeared unto Abraham as the God for Abraham. So the God for Abraham would have been Sin, which was the moon, because that's where he comes from, and that was the moon worship cult there. So I'm just trying to,
Yeah, no, I mean, again, yeah, in his youth, who knows? Because his whole thing with El comes late when he's an old man. So I think you can make the argument that whatever the most popular religion in Ur and Haran is, you can make a strong case for that. Because he was clearly doing something earlier in his life.
So from a astronomy point, would you say that the God of the Bible didn't favor the sun?
Say that again. What was the question again?
Would you say from because a lot of this stuff is they're looking in the sky, it's astronomy and everything like that.
Sure.
So would you say that within a Bible narrative, from that standpoint, would the God of the Bible not be basically he's negative towards the sun? Basically, he's not really a friend of the sun. He doesn't really.
I mean, my position throughout my work is that El corresponds to On in the Mesopotamian pantheon, and so that for whatever reason they decided to start worshiping that high god. That's my argument. Not that he's worshiping the moon god. I mean, I think you can make the case for anything earlier in his life, but I think when he takes the covenant, it's with An, Anu, El, who in my opinion is all one god. It's different names for the same god. So I think that's who the covenant is with An, or Anu or El. But I think that's subject to debate. Frankly, I mean, that's my position, but like, I think that could be hashed out, because like, what's the etymology of El? I don't know how, archaeologically speaking, academically speaking, El first appears on the scene, or where El first appears on the scene. I don't know. I think he goes back to Exos and stuff, but I don't really know beyond that.
Or caps EN for Enlil in Mesopotamia.
Yeah.
So that was also a title for a god, basically. Also like Baal. It was used the same way as Baal was. So in the all capitals EN was also used as the title for God also. So to me, it kind of looks like, that traveled on out of Mesopotamia in a sense, because that was also in where the Enlil temple was.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you, and I think the Bible is clearly an extension of Mesopotamian traditions, and it's like the next generation. It's a reform against some of the older traditions, and the Mesopotamian stuff is all over the place, especially sort of when you're reading between the lines and sort of looking when you're trying to figure out what's going on behind the scenes. You see the Mesopotamian stuff everywhere. Especially once you realize that Astarte is Ishtar and is Inanna, and Ishtar and Inanna, if you're familiar with their traditions, are pretty hardcore sexual and stuff. And so it makes sense why they're calling her shameful and why they're trying to get rid of her, because it's like, practically, pornography by our standards.
And also the name of the morning star, and this is why I talk about the sun. This is why I bring up the sun and him not the God of the Bible not liking the sun, because when we get the morning star, it rises before the sun, and then the sun rises and it's out there in the sky with the sun. You get what I'm saying? So then you have this goddess deity out there with this sun deity. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, the Venus goddess, the Queen of Heaven, had enormous cultural power and enormous cultural resonance. And so, if you're one of these reformers, these guys are like a pre-Taliban kind of thing. Like if they're these hardcore reformers, a goddess like that is just so unacceptable. But when you make that recognition that you can apply the Mesopotamian mythology to this revolution they're having in Judah, I actually don't think it's that hard to see. Like, it's not that hard to see that they're throwing out this sex religion of Ishtar, like that because it clearly is not there later on, So, and to the extent that Venus was totally a rival. It's the third brightest object in the sky after the sun and the moon, and that whoever had that Venus title was it's always the goddess, was always enormously important.
Okay, Naphtali, you still there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay, Naphtali, I see the brother keep putting that up in the chat. Jeremiah 7:18, Queen of Heaven. Can you explain that to us, please? Is they talking about the queen? Do you believe that God has a lady, a queen, a woman? Naphtali? Naphtali?
I'm sorry, I'm in the car. Can you hear me now?
I hear you now.
And you said, does the Most High have a queen?
Yes, do the Most High have a partner?
No, he doesn't. No, he does not. No.
So, do you believe that there's two gods of the Bible? You see what the topic is dealing with.
There is multiple gods in the Bible. The Bible deals with many different deities. There's Molech, there's Chemosh. There's many different deities that are being worshipped that are not supposed to be.
Was there a time that the Israelites were pagans?
Yes, there were times. That's why they went into captivity.
Got you.
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask I want to ask Edwards, and then I'm gonna come to you, Naphtali, and let you go ahead and ask another question. Edwards, the people of the book, when you're talking about Jesus and Adam and Moses and all these people, do you believe that these are real people that you're talking about, or are you just dealing with the story of the book?
Well, it depends which character you're talking about.
I'm talking about Moses, I'm talking about Jesus, I'm talking about Adam.
Adam, I think, is clearly mythological, but Jesus and Moses, I'm going to make the argument from my position that there's a historical kernel behind both of those characters. But the one that we read about in the stories has been radically, in both cases, has been radically reworked for later writers' agendas to meet the agendas of later writers. But I do think there's a historical Jesus. And I mean, obviously, Moses is a lot farther back in time. It's a lot harder case to make. But I believe there was an Exodus, so I think that somebody led the Exodus, so why not Moses?
Do you are you familiar with Dr. Richard Carrier, PhD?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I saw the interview you guys had with him the other day.
Yeah, you know he's gonna go up against Brother Jabari Osaze.
Yeah, I'm really interested to watch that one. That's gonna be interesting.
Yes. He said that Moses, the story of Moses was not real.
I know. Yeah, Richard Carrier is he's like a lot of today's academics, which is that they do this excellent technical work, like Richard Carrier's translations. And I would say this about most prominent scholars out there. Their technical work is outstanding. Like they are really like digging in deep on, on these translations and these texts and really getting things correct. That said, as atheists and secular humanists and scientific materialists, they have an axe to grind with religion. And when you're in academia, spirituality is not allowed because that's not science. And so if you're going to progress through the academics and publish in academic peer-reviewed journals, you're not going to have any spirituality in it. And so for them, they really, it's whether they recognize it consciously or not, all these academics do it. Carrier does it. Dr. Stavrokopoulou does it. A lot of them, all the modern ones doing, they want to undermine, there can't be any truth there. Like they really, because it's a matter of a competition for authority. Like if you give any credence to the religious folks, you're giving authority back to the priests. They want to take authority away from the priests and give it to the professors. Mm-hmm. And so they're always going to say, just their bias is always going to be, even if they see the same data, their bias is always going to be that this stuff didn't happen and there's no truth there and there's no there. I use these guys for their textual work, but I don't rely on the academics for their interpretations. I actually don't think they're really getting the answer right. And so Carrier, like he makes these good points about Jesus. Like I said, his scholarship's outstanding, but he has a presupposition that Jesus didn't exist. And so he works backwards from there. Even though he acknowledges that he might exist. I think there is a there. I think there is a heart to the story, a spark that lit the fire. So I do think there's a historical Jesus.
All right. Naphtali, you got the floor.
All right, thank you. All right, Edward. So my question to you is, I have a two-part question. Right. I would like to know, who do you say the Israelites are? And I would like to know who you say the Canaanites are.
I mean, for me, the Canaanites are just the people that have been living in Canaan all that time. There's an established culture there. They were, we could take the history back to the Hyksos. They invaded Egypt briefly for a while in 1600 to 1500. Then Egypt came and threw them out, and then Egypt took over and ruled Canaan for 400 years. And so the Canaanites are the people living in all those towns, and the Phoenicians.
So are you considering the Jews that are in that land to be Canaanite?
That are there now? I mean, I don't think in the first temple they're Jews. The first temple they're Hebrews and they're Israelites, but they don't become Jews until the second temple.
That's what I'm saying. So do you believe the Israelites in the Jews or the Israelites in that land are the Canaanites?
Well, I think that they were legitimately enslaved in Egypt. I think there's plenty of documentation for Canaanite slaves in the same towns where the Bible is mentioned. They're just no archaeology calling them Israelites. But there is archaeology of slaves doing the exact same brick making as described in the Bible in the very same town. And then, and that's not controversial from an academic perspective. I mean, there's not like any kind of like genetics or a genetic distinction between Israelites and Canaanites. As far as like that kind of evidence goes, the academics say that's all the same population groups. That it's just, there's cultural distinctions, but there's not like a genetic or a language or maybe there's some dietary distinctions. I don't know. It's
well, what about, because the thing is that we have two different worldviews, correct? So my thing is your worldview is the people that are over there within that land, the Jews that are over there in that land, as well as the Palestinians, all of them.
I mean, I don't want to get into today's Israel. Like that's a different kind of conversation.
You said what?
I mean, if you want to talk about today's Israel, like that's a sort of we're getting into a different conversation.
I'm referring to ancient and modern today. We have people. So you're saying to me that I not necessarily just you, but I've been hearing this, that the Israelites are the Canaanites. So my thing is that we know where the Hittites located, correct?
Right.
We know the Hittites crossed over there almost into Turkey, into the Indo-European region. And then when we get into, Carthage, we get into Carthage and all the way up there, we know that the Canaanites fled through that region. Like you said, there was a war, there was a battle, and they were escorted out of the land of Canaan. However, my thing is that those Canaanites are the ones that fled that land. And then they came back and they have been residing in a land that they should not be in, because that's biblical, that's scripture. And we know that the children of Israel were supposed to war to defeat the Canaanites and to run them out of the land. So my thing is that who are the ones that are supposed to be fighting to stay in the land, and who are the ones that are supposed to be fought to be rid of the land?
I mean, people fight over land. I don't know. To the victor goes the spoils, as far as I can tell. I don't know. I view, like as I was saying before, I think there is like these groups really were there, and they really were having disputes and fights over religion, over land, over culture, and I think that it gets down to some semantics and nuance that I'm not prepared to get into, or that I'm not capable of getting into in terms of like how you suss out these sort of like. Because the scholars, the academics will get into all this genetic stuff, and I don't study that, so I can't really comment on it. They'll talk about linguistics, and they'll talk about all sorts of details that how do you define one group from another? These boundaries are quite fluid, and people groups are marrying in amongst one another. You can two different people groups can be living right next door to one another, and still interacting all the time, and maybe, one member of the family, they like the other guys and the rest of the family doesn't. So like, it's all very fluid, but I do think that, basically I do think the Israelites were originally worshiping the same Canaanite gods. And so in that regard, it's they are a subset of Canaanites. I mean, that's just my opinion. I mean, everyone's entitled to their opinion.
All right. Let me go to Naeem. Lord Abba, what up, brother?
Peace. What's going on, sir? I wanted to come and chime in. I seen the topic. Shout out to everybody in the room. Edward Dodge. I'm just curious. I wrote a paper on the Moors and the Moabites. It's been trending on academia.edu for a couple years now. I'll say that. I was curious if you've come across that paper. Moors, Moabites, and Berbers. Are these names and people historically synonymous? Analyzing historical, biblical, and archaeological correlations.
Interesting. All right, go on. Nice to meet you, first of all.
Same.
And so Moor, I'm not familiar with the papers. What did you say? The Moors?
I put a link. I put a link in the private chat. Because I've had these conversations as well. I've had these debates with Hebrew Israelites. I actually agree with your position, and I'm kind of rusty. I'm very rusty on this topic. But I do remember from our research that the people that are called Israelites, the Yahwehs, are a subset of Canaan. Right? These are a cult within the cosmopolitan makeup of a larger Canaan that eventually takes over the region. The Bible has its mixture of historical accuracy and its mythos. And in my research, I found that Joshua, or O'Shea, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, was actually a real character, and that the events that are playing out in the book of Joshua, for instance, are actual events with the typical twist of the Codex writers at that time. So I think my paper would be of interest to you. I showed years ago, I remember me and Tazariak was on Facebook, and we were having a back and forth, which is why he never debate me. Certain debates I really don't care about anymore, but I would still take that debate with Tazariak on the Moabites any day because it's easy work. And I showed him
your position on the Moabites.
Well, the Moabites were, so I come out of let me just kind of quantify my stance and my position. I come out of the Moorish Science Temple of America school of thought, and Noble Drew Ali taught that the Moors were ancient Moabites. You know, these claims were
Spain. You're talking about, right?
Say it again.
Moors from Spain who were ruled Spain.
No, the Moors were from the continent known as Africa. They went and conquered Spain.
Right. That's what I meant. Yeah.
Yes. So one of the things that he taught was that the Moors were in fact Moabites, and through my rigorous research over the years, I was able to compile that link I'm hoping that you have opened up in your browser right now and prove that point, that what Noble Drew Ali said. He also connected the Moors, and he connected us to the Moors and connected the Moors to the ancient Canaanites. And so Noble Drew Ali's position was that those of us who are called Black people, particularly here in America, who come from various tribes who migrated and situated themselves in West Africa, were actually peoples that came from ancient Canaan. I cite several sources in my paper, the Babylonian Talmud being one of them, where the Africans, when Alexander of Macedonia around 332 BC takes over this region, and the Africans summon Alexander of Macedonia saying that this land of Canaan belongs to them. And, they had this whole debate, and the sages, I guess we could call them Hebrew sages or Jewish sages at the time, I call them Yahwehs, they use Genesis 9:25, cursed be Canaan, the servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren. Now, who does the estate of a slave belong to but his master? So there's some interesting pieces in there. I would love for you to read it and get your take on it. Maybe we can have a dialogue on it on sa.neter channel as well.
Yeah,
sa.neter be trying to block me out for the past year. So, but it is what it is. Maybe if somebody else want to have a discussion, sa.neter will be open.
All right, hold on, Lord Abba. Brother, you are always welcome, brother. Don't even do that.
I do have your paper up here, so I will take a look. It looks good. It is highly rated on the site.
He got it, Lord Abba. He got the paper.
So one of y'all heard Edward Dodge say this, right? And this is going to be my little dig at sa.neter. I'm always taking digs at sa.neter, right? And it's all out of respect and for intellectual fun and banter, right? Nobody took our scholarship serious. It's crazy. I don't rock with Polite, but Polite was the only one that read my paper and gave me some feedback. He was like, yo, I can't even lie. I don't know if y'all started to remember, dude kept saying, yo, the Moors are the smartest out of everybody. He kept saying that. I heard it, of course. So, Edward Dodge just said that my paper on academia.edu is very highly rated, and it is. I've been contacted by many, many theological historians who study Moab, the Jews, the Canaanites, Noble Drew Ali also claimed that our people were Hittites. Even when you look at Moab, what Dodge was saying about people that may have lived right next door to each other. So in the biblical narrative, you have Moab and his brother Ben Ami, who is also known as the Ammonites. Well, there's a tradition in Africa of a group of people that look like us, sa.neter, who are called the Moabites, who trace their namesake to the Moabite name that you find copied in the Bible, not originating in the Bible, but copied into the Bible. And this group, the Moabites and the Ben Ami, they still visit each other until this day. They make Hajj together when they go to Mecca. So, I just wanted to get on here because I like expanding the conversation. And I don't think that my research in the conscious community has really had the proper light put on it. So, I took the opportunity to come up here and do that. Good looking out, sir.
Thank you, Lord Abba. Let me move on over to Elder Yara. We got Elder Yara in the building. Yara, you might want to wipe your camera, the glass part, because you look blurry. The finger gonna make it worse.
Hold on, let me find something.
Yeah, the finger gonna make it worse. You gotta probably get a napkin or something.
Let me find something.
Oh, you in the basement again? You ain't on your original joint.
No, I'm in the. I'm in the.
Yeah, you can talk. We can hear you though. Go ahead, brother. We can hear you.
Well, can you hear me? Let me try to clean that though. Yeah, make it work. I'll figure it out. That's a little bit better, I guess. I don't know. Maybe it's the light. But anyway, good out to you, Sarah, and Sister Theology on the panel, as well as Edward Dodge. Nice to meet you. I haven't had a chance to speak with you in person. So this is my first engagement with you. I've seen a lot of your interviews and very interesting, and definitely will be following you. Continue. But if I have, if I may, in reference to the topic, you're proving two Yahwehs or two gods in the biblical narrative.
So that El and Yahweh were separate gods before they get mushed together, syncretized.
Before they get mushed together. And when is it that you suggest that Yahweh comes on the scene, right? Or when Yahweh is
Yahweh comes along, basically in the Exodus, effectively, that which is around 1200 BC, but El had been around for centuries before that.
Okay.
Now El,
right.
to be fair, I want to add a slightly more to that. Ooh. Yahweh may well have been around as a tribal god for centuries before. He was just minor, though. He doesn't become a major god. So I want to there is some other evidence about him possibly being around older. I don't want to rule that out.
Yeah. So there.
We go.
My next question. So no, not at all, sa.neter. So that was my follow-up question. What would be your opinion on your take? And I know it's controversial right now, and a lot is still out on the Mount Ebla tablets or the curse tablets.
Right.
What is your understanding? Is that as they're alluding now?
Let's make sure we're talking about the same thing. Is that the one with the little leaded folded book that they just found relatively recently? That's arguing.
Yes.
So my understanding on that is that the academics aren't taking it too seriously. So I'm not an expert on it, and again, I'm always going to be open to new information, but what little I've looked into that is that there are some folks making some pretty dramatic claims, and then other academics shooting it down. That's what I see.
Yeah, as it is in regards to it being one of the oldest mentions, if not the oldest mentions of the name Yahweh.
Right.
In the text.
There's this stuff about the Proto-Hebrew. So we talk about when the language was invented. My position is that Hebrew language, we don't really have any real evidence of it prior to give or take 900 BC, around there. But there's folks that want to argue that there's this Proto-Hebrew that is like, 500 years earlier so that they could say that Moses wrote the Torah. But all the arguments for Proto-Hebrew are always like very, very cursory. It'll be like a couple little bits of chicken scratch that they're trying to say is like a Hebrew word, and then they try to make that as the claim that it's evidence of the whole Hebrew language. And like, I just don't think those claims are very strong. And so when I hear about archaeological claims from like 1500 BC claiming to have written Hebrew language, I'm inclined to not believe it, frankly. I don't buy the arguments about the Proto-Hebrew. I mean, I think that as a practical matter, the Phoenician phonetic alphabets are an Iron Age development. And that, I mean, there's some evidence of the alphabets being used earlier in cuneiform, but they don't become prominent until the Iron Age. And so it's all the way through the Bronze Age, they're using cuneiform, and then the Bronze Age collapse. It's 300 years of illiteracy, and then these new languages come along. The Greeks and Phoenicians and Hebrews have a new language. That's my understanding.
That's your understanding. So pretty much late Bronze Age 2 is really where you would think the Hebrew language or the beginning of it began.
It's not really my I'm not an expert on like the language development per se. I just know that when it comes to like stone, like things that are written in stone with like the Hebrew words written in stone, so like the archaeologists really find them. Like you've got the Edomite tablet that's from the 800s BC. That's the first mention of Yahweh. That's like a really clear reference of Yahweh, and that's mentions a battle that they have with the Edomites. That's in the Bible, and that's the Mesha Stele, I think it's called. That's one of the oldest
Moabite stone. Some people say.
Yeah, the Moabite stone, exactly.
Yeah,
and so it's also when you start to see the oldest passages, the oldest like whole books that where some of the scholars think that the whole book is old, like the book of Hosea, where they think that entire book was written in the 700s BC, and is like actually like goes back to an actual Hosea. Like I'm inclined to believe the book of Hosea is written by an actual guy named Hosea, who was actually a prophet in the 700s BC in Israel. And so I think that's like sort of when we're seeing the oldest written passages, and everything but that's older than that is oral tradition. So the oral tradition goes way back.
The oral tradition way back. So how do we well, I won't get into the oral tradition argument. In regards to we see other references that may be around the same time. I think you talked about maybe 900 so BC, about even before that, like the Soleb inscription, that clearly we see the term used of Yahweh. Are you thinking that that's a different Yahweh than the God of Israel?
I'm not sure which inscription that one is. That the one that's like from the Habaru people that's much older?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So yeah, that's the reference I'm talking about, where I wanted to be clear that Yahweh may well have existed for a long time as a tribal god, like a minor tribal god, but not as like this major king of the gods type character. So I think this, minor god could have been around for a long time. But then he gets a following, according to the biblical story. The following comes with the Exodus. So like there was like this really dramatic thing that happened with the Exodus. It was like a big deal for those people, and that's where the Yahweh cult really like gets traction. That's my take on it.
Got you. That's very interesting. So, and then this will be my last question. So, you would accept that in the Exodus story, that is where we see the beginning or sort of the prominence of Yahweh being the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
But, I mean, well, that's what the later reformers would have us say. But I think that I think in the beginning it's more of a culture war. They develop the theology and the stories later on. But I think that the Yahwehs are definitely revolutionaries, and that they.
I understand it. So you basically agree or more with the documentary hypothesis. That's
the documentary hypothesis. Is that what you said? You were breaking up.
Yes, the documentary hypothesis. You pretty much follow that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of nuance, and there's a lot of different versions, and people slice and dice it in a lot of different ways. But yes, broadly speaking, yes.
Okay. So, I mean, I Wellhausen and his take on it, right? The documentary hypothesis.
Yeah,
and
he's
how
like
he
the original
furthered
guy
it.
from the 19th century who first thought it up, right?
Yeah. Well, he's actually not the first guy that thought it up. But he really furthered it. But I disagree with his premise on the documentary hypothesis, and I think that's where a lot of these arguments and some of the ones that I've heard similar to yours kind of fell, because I feel like they really build upon this anachronistic like understanding throughout the scripture, where they can accept what's being done in Exodus as the first of Yahweh. But when we look at the book of Genesis, go back to Genesis chapters 18 and 19 that I think you're probably familiar with, when we see usage of the term Yahweh, we shouldn't see it according to the documentary hypothesis. We should only see usages of El, but we see them both.
I think that they're very clearly going back and putting Yahweh into stories that were originally just about El. I think they totally do that on purpose. They interject Yahweh back into the stories to make it about Yahweh when he wasn't originally there.
Okay.
All right.
Do you have any references on that? Just real quick, and I'll let it go. Sorry. Do you have any?
My favorite example of that is the sacrifice of Isaac. If you read the sacrifice of Isaac, so I have a whole thing about the child sacrifice. So on the sacrifice of Isaac, if you read the story carefully, Elohim demands the sacrifice. Now the Phoenicians had these child sacrifices they did to El, and this is documented that they sacrificed babies to El. And like this is what the Greeks and Romans write about it. And so my argument is that when you read that story, it's only about Elohim, Elohim, Elohim. Elohim is the one who demands the sacrifice. That's who Abraham is talking to, all the way up until they get to the moment where Jacob is laid on, or Isaac, is laid on the altar. And it's only then that Yahweh comes in the story. It's only then that Yahweh is first mentioned, and he provides the deliverance. It's Yahweh that provides the substitute bull and says you don't have to sacrifice Isaac, because what I believe is that this is part of their Reformation. They're trying to eliminate this practice of child sacrifice. And so the Yahwists are a cult that says, come to our temple. You don't have to sacrifice your babies if you come to our temple. And that they're interjecting. They have an existing story. A lot of scholars think that there's a lot to be said on the story of Isaac, that in the oldest versions of the story, this is one theory, one academic theory, is that in the oldest version of the story, Isaac actually did die. And that they only later on wrote more stories that had Isaac live on and have a wife and stuff. And so the scholars believe that there's different versions of this story, and that the oldest vestiges of it, Isaac would have died. And so I think that, again, this is part of the Reformation. And so the Yahwists, they add on to the story, say, oh no, Isaac didn't really die because Yahweh saved him. That's one of these places where I think they add Yahweh into an older story to change the story. But there's other examples like that.
All right. Thank you. Let me move on.
I appreciate it.
I want to get everybody in here. Reginald, what's up, Reginald? Where you been at, man?
Hey, Shalom, sa.neter, peace and black power to all the brothers and sisters out there. All praises to Yahweh, to all my Israelite brothers and sisters. Peace and hotep to all the Canaanites brothers and sisters. I just been chilling, doing a little artwork, working on a little program right now in Minnesota where I'm trying to tear down a little wall of perdition between Black Americans, Ethiopians, and Somalians. So we all been having some pretty good conversations.
Have the title caught your attention to come in today, sir?
Exactly. Remind me of the title one more time. My apologies, sa.neter.
When Israel were pagans, and I will prove 2 gods in the Bible.
You know, that is an interesting title. That is, because I know Abraham's dad really wasn't rocking with what Abraham was rocking with. So when you look at the origin of how the scriptures describe Abraham, you know, he had to have been doing something a little different than, you know, obviously the God of Abraham, which eventually became the God of Abraham, Isaac, and then the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So that makes a lot of sense that Abraham was probably doing something different more than likely.
Do you have a question for the guest, or do you have a statement?
I was just kind of listening to what he was saying as far as Israelites being a clan of the Canaanites, and really just trying to understand his position and learning from him, you know, in humility.
Okay. All right, thank you. Nepal Shada. Peace, sister.
Peace.
Yes, peace to you. This is great. I love it. Somebody said in the chat that Ed is holding up really well with all the questions. I love how everybody's coming up, flexing their scholarship. We have a bunch of, real scholars in here. Even though I don't agree with some of the people, I like that they're coming in and just, talking. This is a popular topic anyway.
Yeah,
like this.
the topic.
Yeah. Go ahead, Senator Witt.
Yeah, Captain also liked the topic. He said that's an interesting topic. So
yeah, we talk about this a lot.
Captain might be interested in calling you out, Edward. So I'll be expecting that call, man.
All right.
That could be a good debate, on the topic that y'all was talking about.
Right. What do you think? I'm going to ask you some questions. You're talking about the God El. Have you looked into, I did discuss this with you a little bit on another build, but have you yet looked into the gods, also not just the Canaanite gods, but the gods of Kemet, the gods of Egypt present in the Bible?
Well, I mean, Asherah and is totally syncretized with Hathor. So you got that. But which gods are you referring to specifically?
Het-Heru, Hathor, there's a strong presence of the Hellenistic name Hathor. Het-Heru is the Kemetic name, the Kemetic name.
Okay.
Het-Heru has a very strong presence. There's a lot of veneration of her. And I say that it's esoteric because you have to really look like you do. You have to look past the surface to see it. For instance, even when you look at the story of, and I want to say this to you, when you talk about Hathor, she was before Aset, who is known as Isis. So in a sense, even though Isis didn't completely replace Hathor, Isis is Hathor is like the prototype or the predecessor to
right.
Isis.
I kind of see it as like Egypt is so rich, has such a rich tradition. They've got two mother goddesses. That's kind of the way I see it.
Yeah, they do. And so I was going to say, when you look at the story of, yes, there's some Hindu background in there, but when you look at the story of Abram, he is a representation of Asar, which is Osiris. Hathor is Hagar, and Isis is Asherah. So I said all that because you mentioned that Asherah is Hathor, Het-Heru. However, Asherah is a representation in that particular story of Sarah is a representation of Asherah, which is a representation of Isis. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right.
So you said, because you said you see Asherah as Het-Heru, I see more of Isis being, they're all the same goddess.
Yeah, I mean, all the goddesses are ultimately syncretized together into Shakti. All the goddesses are ultimately one. When I talk about the Isis, Hathor, that's a very specific thing. It's in the iconography where Hathor is very famous for her hair. She's a very specific hairdo in the iconography. And so Asherah has that same hair in a lot of the iconography from the Asherah time period. So that's where that specific connection comes from.
But Het-Heru, I want to let you know, Hathor predates Asherah. I don't know if you've looked at it.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm sure that's true, yeah. Asherah, my understanding that Asherah, Astarte, and Anat are second millennium. Like they at least go back to the Hyksos and probably maybe before that, but they're like a second millennium. Whereas the oldest gods of Egypt are older than that. And the oldest ones of Sumer are older than that.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. For those of y'all that want to ask y'all a question, y'all need to turn your camera on so I can see your hand. Raise your hand from here on in so I can acknowledge you. Neftali, you got the floor, Neftali.
All right, thank you. All right, Edward, thanks for being a good sport. So I'm getting ready to push back a little more.
All right.
And people, I'm asking these questions because I'm trying to build with them, trying to get an understanding. So so when we get to the Egyptians, what race or ethnic group would you classify them as?
You guys asked me this the other day. Egypt is in Africa. They're definitely African. Now, you know, at different time periods, you've got
Sub-Saharan?
different groups
Would you
running them.
classify them as, would you
What's that?
classify them as sub-Saharan?
I mean, it's not south of the Sahara, but it's
Is there a
it's not
difference
really my
between
field
the
of study on like
sub-Saharan
the
Africans?
etymology.
Hey,
You know,
hold on, Naphtali. I want you to give him time to answer the first question before you come with the second one, so he can get it out. That way, we can all have an understanding of where you're going.
all right, I'll just say my position real quick. It's pretty generic. Egypt is African, but at the same time, it's a diverse enough culture. There are different people groups coming and going. So depending on which time period you're talking about, which pharaohs in different time periods can be from different ethnicities, but because they get invaded and stuff, you know. So like Cleopatra, for instance, had Greek heritage, but Egypt is an African nation. So it's for Africans to lay claim to, in my opinion.
So would you say the ones that enslaved the children of Israel, would you say those were the ones that were, what you would say, African or considered to be black,
again,
or whatever you want to classify them as
far as I know, like again, it's not. I don't study Egypt history that closely, and I know there's different, you know, people groups, the Libyans and you know, from Ethiopia coming and going. So I can't get into too much detail about it.
All right, so I keep asking this because I'm trying to get to the bottom of it. So when you say the children of Israel, are you saying that there are these Jew olive complected people? Is that who you're saying these are?
I mean,
it's okay. I just want to know.
Yes, I would say they're all Middle Eastern complexion, generally speaking, olive, caramel, whatever you want to call it. It's not something I focus on a lot.
And no, it's not that you focus on it. Right? It's not the fact that you. Excuse me,
Natasha. Everybody jumping in. Just
no. I was just one thing.
I see you, Reginald. Your hand is up.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Finish up, y'all.
Okay, just let me say this. All right. So with that, because the thing that is important is because when they found the Canaanite burial ground, that's when they did a DNA analysis. And when they did the DNA analysis on the Ashkenazi Jews, or the Jews that are within that land, they found out that they actually matched the DNA of the Canaanites. So the thing is that they are indeed the Canaanites. And that's what we can conclude, is that they are the Canaanites, but the true Jews, the true Israelites, are the so-called African Americans.
All right,
and they African, sub-Saharan African descendants. That's who are the true Israelites.
Right, real quick.
True children of Israel.
What you wanted to say, Nepal, real quick?
Okay, thank you. Yes, Ed, you're familiar with, because I've spoken to you about me being a Hebrew Israelite as well, and you're very familiar of the Hebrew Israelites. She's coming from a perspective which she's a Hebrew Israelite. She, I'm just respect. No, I'm gonna say I'm respectful.
Hear me out.
I'm here. I can tell you what I am. I'm here.
I know him. I'm
here.
Yo, slow down.
What?
I do not want you to address each other.
No, I'm not addressing her. I'm talking to Ed. I've known him for years.
I haven't addressed her. She's addressing me. I haven't addressed her.
Man, yo, listen to me, ladies. I do not want you to addressing each other. I don't even want y'all to say each other's names. No, I'm not. I'm
deeper than just just hearsay. We actually see the pottery, we see the language, we see the DNA analysis that is being that's being partaken in. So my thing is this: we have to really think about it like this. We can't just say, oh, it's based off of hearsay, based off of word of mouth, based off of my feeling, when we have so much genetic material, as well as we have pottery, we have the language to showcase who actually are the Canaanites. So that's what I'm saying.
Yes. Okay. By no means am I trying to disrespect any of the sisters. All right.
Subscribe to like the Mother Goddess.
Yeah, my whole book is going to be called Mother of God, and my argument is that in the Bible, specifically in Genesis 1:2, you see that the Mother of God, and that you see them being divorced, and so that this whole thing with Asherah, Astarte, Enad, that these are the traditions of the Mother Goddess. And when they get rid of them, that this is the final, most important step in the transition from paganism to monotheism, is a world where the Father rules alone. The definition of monotheism, or a definition of monotheism, is religion that doesn't have a feminine divine, that doesn't have a Mother Goddess at all. doesn't even have a concept of mother goddess, in there's not even a word for it. So they had to get rid of the mother goddess, and I argue that that's the the final climactic last step in the transition from paganism to monotheism, and so that these triple goddess formulations. So there's Asherah, Astarte, and Anat among the Israelites, but this triple goddess formulation is repeated all over the place. Hathor, Bastet, and Sekhmet are the Egyptian version. Parvati, Durga, and Kali are the modern Hindu version. There's a bunch of them. They're in the satanic verses in the Quran. That this is all one big religion, one very big, very old religion that doesn't belong to anyone. There's no authority. It's the people's religion, and it's a mother goddess, nature religion, life, death, renewal. And that's what these traditions are all about. They're very old. They're very widespread. Not to say universal, but
excuse me, Edward. Nepal, you there? Nepal, you there?
Oh, I was muted out. Yes, I'm here.
Hold it down for a minute. I got to make a quick run. Hold it down.
Okay, I sure will.
Continue.
Right. Go ahead, everybody.
All right, I have one more question, if I could, Mr. Edwards. As long as the Earth has been, as far as recent history, certainly, as long as the Earth has been patriarchal, do you think it would be more conducive for human beings to subscribe to a matriarch?
So this is a big part of my work. My argument is that patriarchy is not as old as we're told, that it really only follows kingship, and patriarchy follows kingship, and kingship is only 5,000 years old. So kingship, patriarchy, slavery, it's all wrapped up in the Bronze Age. And that as we transition now into the space age, and look around, folks, like we are into a new era of humanity. Like this, we are not living in the Iron Age anymore. We need to bring back some of these things. And certainly, as I was mentioning before, I'm an environmentalist. My work is really about, I do renewable energy as my profession. And I stumbled into this goddess stuff because I realized it was talking about the same zero waste circular economy models that I was getting at in my environmental work, is exactly what, this is the mother goddess, like a philosophical, theological version of the same thing. And so when I saw that my own beliefs on the environment were dovetailing with these old nature traditions, that's when I really tumbled down this rabbit hole. And the more I learned, the more I felt it was an important topic to keep uncovering.
Do you think we're better off subscribing to a matriarch than a patriarch?
All right, so matriarchy is where I define a matriarchy as families where there's two elements to it. Is that you build the families around the mothers. So the mothers have the bloodlines and not the father's bloodlines. And when you have the father's bloodlines, you've got to control the women's sexuality. It's so important that girls remain virgins, so they're married and everything, so you can control for baby daddies. But that is not the default condition of humanity. The default condition of humanity is to build families around the mothers, and the sperm donor is anonymous. So that would give women a lot more freedom. Secondly, they would build the families around the mothers. So when you got married, the man would go live with the woman's family as opposed to the woman going to live with the man's family. This case is hugely empowering for women because the women stay home, they maintain the wealth, they own the hearth and home, they own the property. And if there's an unhappy marriage and a divorce, the man gets kicked out and he gets sent home, but the woman has never left her family home to begin with. So these types of matriarchal families are very empowering for women, without, I would argue, taking away power from men, but they have to share more power with women. And it's obviously going to be better for women. And I raised my daughters to be empowered women. So I'm all about encouraging, women getting their power back that they once had. And in the space age and change of technology, it's an opportunity for women to gain some of their lost power back.
Okay, thank you. Did Cosmic Sankofa speak already?
Yeah, I did speak, but I had another question if I could.
Ahead.
So there's I'm trying to remember the artifact's name, but there's an artifact that's like a small little stand that has the words Yahweh and his Asherah on it. It's like yeah. Do you speak about that as well?
Yeah, I mean, in the books, I've got all the archaeology. There's not even that many pieces that talk about Asherah, so I can list them all. There's only maybe a dozen or something. It's not that many. So yes, I do have that pictured in my book. In fact, I could probably find a picture of it.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember its name right now. I can't remember it at the moment.
But yeah, this is the kind of stuff that really blew people's minds when they first started discovering it. And it's been pretty controversial.
Kuntili Arjad, that's it.
Yeah.
The Kuntili Arjad inscriptions.
Exactly. But yes, I do mention them all. I mean, one thing I'm definitely doing is taking all the important archaeological finds and laying them all out. It's a big part of my argument.
Okay. Okay. So you mostly deal with, like, I guess 1500 BCE up until 600, 500 BC.
This book goes back to the Ice Age, but I'm gonna be a little more contained with the new book. I'm gonna focus on Mesopotamian history. So basically, from 3000 to 500 BC is going to be the main focus of the book. So the Inanna, Ishtar, Astarte. That's kind of the three sort of sections, if you will.
How do you incorporate the Ugaritic text and that work into your?
Yeah, they're
into your
incredibly
work?
important. They're central to the whole thing, because that's where we see Anat. And so Anat is like Kali behind me. She's got a necklace of skulls, a necklace of freshly cut heads, and a belt of human hands, and she blazes in blood and delights in slaughter. And she goes and tells El that she's going to smash his skull in and make his gray beard run red with gore and tear down his house. Because Anat is the most powerful piece on the chessboard in the Ugaritic text. She destroys death. She restores Baal to life. She trounces everybody. And nobody even comes close to challenging her. I argue that's why they had to get rid of her, because she is a higher authority than El. If she can destroy El, it's because she's not submissive to El. And so that's exactly why they don't mention Anat in the biblical text. They mention Asherah to cut her down, and they mention Astarte and they insult her and call her shameful Astarte. But Anat, they can't even mention Anat because she's too powerful. She is she's more powerful than El. She's more powerful than Yahweh. She's more powerful than everybody. And so the way they take her power away is to not give her a name, to not name her at all, just to ignore her. And by taking the name, just as giving a name is theological and spiritual and important, same as taking a name away. So by not mentioning her, by not including her in the story, they remove her from existence, so to speak. And so that's how they remove her authority. So yeah, the Ugaritic texts are huge.
Okay, thank you.
How you doing, Mr. Dodd?
Hello. How are you, Dominic? Nice to meet you.
Hey, how you doing, man? So I had a quick question. Well, few questions. Just I don't know, just to see if we're on the same level, I guess. Just concerning the 7 nations that Israel was not supposed to go into, being that they were Canaanites. I'm gonna try and squeeze my entire question into one. Would you agree that the Israelites were swallowed up amongst the Canaanites, and that there was a remnant that was left behind that was a pure seed of Israel?
That was
what would you stand at?
Left behind at what time period are we talking about?
I mean, throughout the entire scriptures, we see that the Israelites was having an issue with mixing with the Canaanites, and we constantly see them being judged for these things. So,
yeah, I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
I mean, the Israelites were clearly not getting along with their neighbors. And as far as them being left behind, after the exile and stuff, I mean, some of them stay behind. I'm not really quite clear what the question is. But
I guess what I'm asking is the seed of Israel or the people of Israel, are they mostly Canaanite blood, or is it Israelite blood? If we look at the text, just the text.
Well, they don't have pure blood until later on. They clearly are mixing, and they're clearly being unhappy. The biblical writers are very unhappy that they're mixing, because when Ezra brings the book of the law back to the Second Temple, he finds that they've still been marrying Canaanite women, and he tears his shirt and he rolls around and he's so upset. And then he forces them to divorce all these women. So clearly they've been continuing to intermarry and hang out with the Canaanites against the wishes of the priestly authorities.
So would you say that most of the Jews during Jesus' time, are they Canaanite, or are they?
All right, so then what happens is Ezra, they start a new rule that to be a Jew, you have to be born of a Jewish mother. And that's how they can establish a pure bloodline for Jews. And so from that moment forward, presumably, according to the story, they should have some.
You said that it was established through the mother's line?
Yeah, no. So Jews to this day, you have to be born of a Jewish mother. You can't so if you're a Muslim, you can marry some woman from a different religion and your children are Muslim, but not for a Jew. You have to be born of a Jewish mother. Now they're more.
Testing 1 2 1 2 1 2. I'm in the building, man. I'm in the building. Sorry about that. I was on mute and I didn't even know it. Damn, my bad. My bad. Yeah, I want to say we still have this going on right here. This debate is still going on. It's going to happen on the 8th of February, not January. That's only because Apostle was in pain. He was sick. And so I had to, fall back a little bit because the brother was sick. So, so now we going all the way in. And I spoke to the brother yesterday. He's a lot better. And he says, sa.neter, we getting it in this Saturday at 7:00. Be in the building. We back. We coming back slowly. And the HOK and sa.neter Studios, I want to say, y'all got to stop believing everything you hear, man. Stop believing everything y'all hear on these YouTube channels, bro. It's like, man, people could be anything they want to be on YouTube. I'm noticing, man. I'm learning. So you got to stop believing in everything y'all hear. sa.neter is in the hospital. sa.neter is sick. sa.neter lost. Come on, man. Stop it, man. A lot of y'all got my numbers out there. You got my emails out there. Hit me up. Talk to me. That's what certain people was doing. They was calling me directly. Sorry, you good? Yes, I'm good. Elder Yara, Captain Tazariak. They would call me. Yo, you good? Yes, I'm all right, brother. Oh, man, I heard this. I heard that. I'm like, Captain, you know better than that, bro. This is YouTube. These dudes would say anything just to get a couple of views, just to get some hits, So I'm good. I'm here. I'm not sick. I'm healthy. I'm good. I just been relaxing, taking some time off and doing my own personal thing. But anyway, we got Jabari making a splash return this Monday. This Monday, I should have put the date there, but the flyer will be ready. It'll be ready. This Monday at 7 o'clock sharp, Brother Jabari will be going in. Trump administration. Trump admit is much worse than we thought. This is what Professor Jabari is saying. Do you regret now that you voted for Trump? It's too late now, y'all. It's too late now. And so Jabari will be in the building. He will be showing all this information. I saw this Spanish woman. She was on not TikTok, but she was on Instagram. And she was so happy and bragging about how she voted for Trump. And you know how they do that cut in a few moments later. She was crying. She was happy that she voted for Trump. And then y'all saw that? And then later on, she was crying because they exported her husband. And they sent her husband back. So that's crazy. That was crazy right there, man. So sometimes we got to really sit back and analyze stuff and know what we're doing, man. I know it was a real scare 2 weeks ago or a week ago because my sister works in the hospital. She said a lot of people couldn't even get their work done because he cut off their Medicaid. It was a shutdown for a minute. It was a shutdown for a minute. I guess they didn't go through with it because he ain't get all the votes or the people ain't signing, but it was a shutdown. And so Jabari will be in the building to clear it up. Jabari is asking everybody to come through. Now y'all can talk and say if y'all still agree with it. There is absolutely no profanity on the channel. Anybody, I don't want to hear no, I'm sorry, I apologize. I don't want to hear none of that. No profanity. I will ban you. They already got me shadow banned. They got me blocked, family. So now I'm fighting to get my channel back and get the notifications out. And the only way I could do that is by being a good boy. Being a good boy. I want to get my notifications out. And all of this happened because of the filth and the hateful people, you know, the hateful people just constantly going in, flagging, you know, stuff like that, man. So that's how all of this blocking stuff started, man. You know what I'm saying? So y'all know who they are. Y'all know who the people are. I'll just leave it like that. But yeah, we are back. We're going to be bringing in some powerful content. I got Professor James Smalls on the list for this coming next week. I have a few people, Baba Hayawata Kamene, on the list coming in. Lord Jamal. I got a few people that's getting ready to come in and do their thing. So let's just sit back and take it all in, man. Peace and blessings to everybody. I'm out of here, y'all. Peace. I see y'all yeah. I see y'all Monday. Monday night, 7 o'clock. It's going down with Brother Jabari Osaze. It's going down. Peace and Black Power. Is there anything else I said? Is there anything else anybody would like to ask me? Any questions? Any questions that the people would like to ask? All questions is on the table. I just got to be, yeah. Dan, let me say this. My Patreon. Y'all see my Patreon? You see my Patreon? I'm live, baby. I'm live. I'll call you back. All right. Y'all see my Patreon? Man, listen, I uploaded 20. I told y'all the last time I was up here, I said I'm going to upload 20 videos. Uploaded 20 more on the list. And I'm going to do 20 more tomorrow. So my Patreon is blowing up. It's getting bigger and bigger. Pause. Larger and bigger and larger and bigger. Pause. Y'all know I'm not talking about nothing else but that. So we ain't gonna play no games, man. We too grown for that. So yeah, if y'all not subscribed to my Patreon, y'all the one that's missing out. Trust and believe that. You are the one that's missing out. Now, are there any questions from anybody? I'll wait for a minute, 2 minutes, and then I'll be out. If it ain't no questions, I'll be ghost. The link is in the chat. If y'all have any questions, I'll wait for a minute. I'm not going to have a lot of foolishness. Everybody don't get a shot now. I tried that. I tried to look out for everybody, and you can't do that. So if you ain't got that fire, you ain't got that information, don't even hit me up, man. Don't even hit me up to come on, none of that. I got to deal with some information, man. The link is in the chat. The link is in the chat. Okay. Nobody have no questions for the brother. Nobody have no questions for the brother. A lot of y'all still didn't see this debate right here, right? When Jabari took on Gorilla Hebrew, Nepal Shaddai, and Elder Yara, y'all didn't even see that debate. Y'all didn't even see the debate with Judge Joe Brown and Jabari. So yeah, I got some. That's on the Patreon. All of that is on Patreon. In case you didn't know, all of that is on the Patreon. See. All right, going once, going twice, and 3 times. Peace and black power, everybody. See y'all probably tomorrow. But I know I'm gonna see y'all Saturday. Getting ready to go down.